Just waiting on Drew. Drew, are you here? Okay. We'll get started, and maybe he'll trickle in shortly. Maybe he took a break. I was going to provide some background and context. Those were my first notes for today. But I think all of the previous panels before us and the title of the summit, the theme of the summit, kind of provides enough background and context in itself. So we can just get started. And what we just heard the last panel talk about from an academic perspective is marrying like the theory and what academia has been studying for a long time, but as executive leaders, which you have seen since the beginning of your career probably, as the proving of the business case, which I think has been proven 10 times over, right? So we've seen it proven in theory. We've seen pockets of light where it's been done well, and not necessarily in our industry, but we know that it can be done. And so how do we move the business case or the business imperative from being something that we talk about, right, to something that we effectively implement? Let's start with Sonia.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for having me here. This has been an incredible day, and I've just heard so many incredible stories. So feel really grateful to be part of this conversation and know that all of these people are coming together to have these conversations and to hopefully affect some change. I think from what I see in terms, and I've mostly focused on Hispanic multicultural, and I also do a lot of Black multicultural work. I think that what I've seen throughout my career is the mistake is that people want a formula, right? They just want to, okay, how are we going to reach all Latinos and how are we going to make that money, right? And Latinos in Houston are not the same as in Miami or as in New York or as in Chicago. And I could actually say that about, the Black population as well. They vary culturally from around the country. So if you're approaching it in a sense of what's the easiest, quickest way to bring this into the business, I think that you're already starting off on the wrong foot. I think that the way to make it work is, number one, to be genuine and authentic about it and want it to be part of your DNA. And that means whether you're an agency or a brand or whatever, you have to approach it from a way of like, you really want this to be part of who you are as an organization. And what I mean by that is that it has to come from the top down and from the inside out. You have to look at the organization and say, what is the best way? What works for us? What is our lane? Because most can't be everything for all people, but how can we do our part to move the needle? And look at it from a sense of how do we engage our employees and create this culture? How do we communicate this down to our customer? How do we reflect that with our vendors and our supply chain? And how do we make sure that happens with the communities that we impact? And then you build teams, and again, the other mistake is that we're just going to put this person here and we're going to call him DEI chief, and okay, we checked the box. No, those people can have all the great ideas, but if they don't have the investment, if they don't have the support in order to be able to execute and can't bring the right people into the room, then all you are doing is window dressing. And I think as now the president of HPRA, I'm very, I feel very strongly about who gets to put HPRA next to their name and claim us as a partner, because we really want to see that you are trying to do the work. And as was said earlier from the study and the academics, is that it is a long game. You're not seeing a lot of changes because it's only been 2 years. But the people that are really stuck to it, they have that commitment, then you will see the changes. So, maybe the revenue doesn't show up this year or the next year, but if you're really committed and you want to make it part of your DNA and you want to keep doing the benchmarks, then I think that you can be successful.
I like what you said about organizations looking for a blueprint, right? So we just saw a blueprint here. Add a chief diversity officer. Here are the things that you need to do, right? And they think that this is going to help them fulfill that as the business imperative. But something more compelling needs to happen, because just putting in place a chief diversity officer is and even if they have some teeth, right? There's more to it than just checking that box, right? So Sumi, what is your perspective on we've been talking about the business case forever. It's been proven for years. And so if it is such a case, right, if it increases profitability and innovation and, and reduces attrition in the organizations, what more do we need to hear about the business imperative, or how do we involve it so that we actually can realize some of those fruits of including DE&I in our strategies?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I actually have microphone envy, so I'm like, can you hear me? So I have to tell you, I get a little annoyed by the whole business imperative part of it. I think it's very trivializing for something that is so like meta level important. And yet we have to speak the language of whatever organization and whatever audience that we need to connect with. So I get it. The one thing that I would say in terms of all of us who are committed to advancing diversity, equity, inclusion is that we have to play bigger. I loved all of those things that were shared, but we got to do even more. And I'll start with even just the language that we use. We are already fighting this movement to commoditize us, to make us small. And even the words or the letters DEI, I rarely use it. I'll use it sometimes, but would I say, oh, I'm just really, really interested in WP, world peace? Or would I be like, oh, you know what? I'm an HR activist as in human rights. No, I think like diversity, equity, inclusion are so important. And so I think people want to just make us into these little acronyms and pat us on the head and not really integrate us into the whole of the business. And so that's where I would just say, we have to think bigger, we have to play bigger. So instead of DE&I, the words that I often think of for my shorthand is TWT, which is total world transformation. And so when we get pushback or anything like that, is creativity not important to you? Is innovation not important to you? Is retention not important to you? Is growth not important to you? So I just think it's so important that we play bigger and we speak more the language of organizational transformation than food, fun, and flags.
Thank you. The language is important, although I will say diversity is only a bad word, it sounds like, when you talk about people. And when you talk about diversifying, your investments in the stock market, that's a good thing, right? But maybe we need to shift that and talk about the transformation. So I appreciate that. So in thinking bigger, but with the maybe impending recession, how do we balance that with organizations that are going to be a little bit tighter on the wallet, right? As we move into being profit focused. You mentioned, the minimizing of our work. There's a lot of legislation, right, and rules and regulations that are coming about that are actually they're a threat to DE&I efforts and strategies. So, Sumi, what are your thoughts on how we manage that as we move into a period where we might be looking at budget cuts? Is DE&I still going to be a priority?
Yeah, so I remember having the same kind of thought track in the beginning of 2020. And with the pandemic that was coming, oh no, I'm really, really nervous about the contraction that will happen as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion. And then Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and the racial reckoning that ensued, that, gosh, I don't really know what to say right now. If people don't get it by now, what more do we have to do? I will say in the context of our organizations, I work with 24 different agency brands, we're not going back. We just cannot go back. It's too critical to our work. We have far more to do, but the thought of going back just doesn't work. And I think because the tension is necessary. I will say that a surround sound strategy is important because that pressure and that tension needs to come bottom up from everyone that works within our organization, as well as those that we wish to attract within our organization. It happens with our clients. We can't show up the way that we used to I would say 2016 even. We act like we suddenly had an awakening in 2020. But gosh, if you weren't paying attention during the previous administration, I don't know what to say. But we should have been paying attention even before that. But yeah, I would say that in our organizations, we are not going back, and I believe that that tension and that pressure continues to exist, and we put it on ourselves internally as well.
Yeah, agreed, Sonia.
I'm so glad to hear you bring up the previous administration because, yeah, this happened already in 2016. I watched it happen. I watched companies and, heard of the conversations, coming from corporate boards and, trickling down to me from, the client, like scared, like, oh my God, they are going to absorb all the multicultural work and it's just going to go general. And I watched companies literally say, we're not doing this anymore. They felt very empowered by the narrative that was being heard politically and said, yeah, we're not going to do it. And, if that's the attitude you're going to take, or if you're going to have this position that, money's tight, for multicultural, it's always tight, let me tell you. There's never enough dollars at the table. It's always tight. When people want to do something, they'll find the money and they'll find the way. But those people, those brands that stuck, and I'll actually call some out, because I think that there are some brands that are actually doing the work, that have made mistakes, they've recalibrated, but, like Target. Target has an incredible DEI program, and they stuck to that. And today, what employees, report as their company culture and what their brand is and how they have integrated Hispanic Heritage Month and supported Latino and Black creators as well, Black History Month, and how they've been supporting the supply chain. Those that stuck with it, and didn't listen to the narrative in 2016 are thriving. And they're in a really good position because now we have this amazing new generation that is going to hold you accountable, that is going to be looking at those things, and that they're going to say, we don't want to do business with you, or we don't want to work for you because we know that you're not really about that. So all the people that have been doing the work since before 2016 and didn't let themselves get derailed, they're going to get the best talent, they're going to get the dollars, and they're going to continue to thrive. So I hope that the people that are doing the work now are not scared by, pending recessions and other things of that nature.
Awesome. That was powerful right there. So I want to go back to your, Sunmi, your comment about, our language, right? You don't use DE&I, and you want to, TWT, I like it, right? What other language can we use to really emphasize what the spirit of diversity, equity, and inclusion is, so that people understand the human centricity behind it, that it's not actually exclusive, right? It's inclusive of even white men, right? Oftentimes we hear well, I feel like when I hear about diversity, it doesn't apply to me, or it means that I shouldn't be involved, right? So what other language can we use to talk about what the real spirit of DE&I is?
Yeah, so it's funny, I'll tell you a little, kind of funny, kind of not, but so I just don't allow negative self-talk around me. I sometimes do it to myself, but I don't like to hear it. I just don't, because I think the words that we use harms us and harms those around us. So for example, if I see that turnstile within our tables, the lazy Susan, we don't call lazy Susan lazy, we call that brilliant Susan. Have you ever had slutty brownies? Anybody? Okay, it's an Oreo in a chocolate chip cookie inside a brownie. It is amazing. We call those misunderstood brownies in our home. We will not malign baked goods in our home. So all of that to say is that even the words that we use around soft skills, I hate when I hear soft skills. Do you know what soft skills are? Soft skills are superior skills. Soft skills are level 6, level 5 leadership kind of stuff. And so when we make that distinction between hard skills and soft skills, it kills me. But even just those characteristics of empathy, of understanding, of appreciation, of kindness. I think that's the kind of leadership we need, especially now when you think about all of the trauma, big T, small t trauma that folks have faced. To not be able to be an empathetic leader, to not be an inclusive leader, it's like, I don't think that means that you're a leader at all. So.
Wow. Yes, I agree. If you can lead a whole team and you have a vision and you can move forward with empathy and balance that with the business priorities, that's a leader, right? That is absolutely a leader. Sonia, any thoughts on that?
It's hard to follow that. That was pretty good. But I agree. The language should be more empowering, because I feel sometimes the way that we talk about DEI, we make people feel like, oh, you poor thing, you've always been excluded, and we're going to make sure that we include you. And it really should be more about like how do we empower people and our organizations feel like they're working together as a group, and it's purpose-driven and it has impact, and we know that that's what people are looking for nowadays. And how do we create that energy, and you do it with empowering and kind and empathetic language, as you said. So.
Absolutely. So, Sonia, we have seen, like with Zeno and Igami, and with our organizations reaching out to HBCUs and tribal colleges and universities and Hispanic-serving institutions. They're partnering with LGBTQ NGOs, right? So we've seen efforts where organizations want to partner with external partners to make sure that they're bringing in that knowledge. Are you seeing a lot more of that? Is that a model that you think is going to work? Are there any barriers there?
So I've seen it for a long time, but obviously now that I'm the president of HPRA, more people call me directly to talk about these things. I'm going to lead with your advice, and I'm going to start positively and saying I almost cried when I heard Barbie and Tanisha up here, because this is exactly the sort of thing that I continue to push for, because I feel that what happens, especially with the large agencies, is that they know there's a business case, and they know the money's there, but they don't want to do the work, and they come and they make offers, and they know that you need to scale up, and they make offers, and they put all the money in front of you. They promise these very hard, Black women, men, and Latino men and women that are building these businesses that built that reputation in your brand. They promise you that capital, and then all of a sudden you go in, you find that you've lost your voice, they've completely swallowed all the work that you've done, and you find that you have to leave and maybe even start over. And they do it like, maybe there was no intention of being genuine, or maybe they were in over their heads when they brought you in and they thought they were, or maybe they just wanted to take you out of the market so that you couldn't get the money, and that happens a lot. So when I see, when people call me, back to your question, and they say, hey, such and such firm is looking at my agency, and I was like, well, just make sure that whatever you really want for your team, that is very clear on paper, that you negotiate benchmarks for that and the investment on that, and then be prepared to still get, to still not have those things met and possibly start over. So when I see what you guys have done, and you allowed Tanisha to come authentically to the table, and then you both work together and you say, okay, how do we help each other? Those are the kinds of collaborations that we should be seeing. And a round of applause to you. I'm so excited. You have, HPRA is open to you whenever you want. You have our platform. I want your message and I want the small business leaders to not get scared and not be driven by fear and learn how to say no. If somebody is offering you something that is too good to be true, or you feel like this partnership just doesn't feel right to me, you see how Tanisha talked about, we just knew, you should feel like that. You should feel like that, and you shouldn't be driven by fear. You should be able to say no to a job, or no to a project, or no to a partnership or a collaboration if it doesn't feel right, and feel empowered to do that. So,
Yeah, we in our pre-discussions, we talked about specifically about Zeno and Agami being one of those models for partnership. And I'm watching Bill Amata shake his head over here because we've had conversations as well about how we can come together with our organizations, both multicultural and mainstream, to learn from each other. And oftentimes those who are in multicultural organizations, they've cut their teeth at a mainstream organization. They've learned how to do the traditional PR skills and the more creative, progressive skills in communications, and are just as valuable, right? And are great partners. So, Sunmi, did you have any thoughts on this topic?
And just in terms of partnerships in general, I think anyone who's done multicultural marketing understands you can't just do drive-by kind of connections. And I think anyone who is kind of still doing that, and I still see some of that, clearly misdirected, right? Because our communities really require for folks to be in it with us. And I remember listening on a conversation about efforts with Spelman, for example, in Atlanta where I am, and folks don't want you to just come in for the career fair, but like, come in, help us define the curriculum for us, be in partnership with us. So that's what we try to do with our partnerships, is when we partner, let's partner deep. It's not just about the donor dollars, but board support, through these specific efforts, but in all of the ways to really be in relationship with one another. So that would just be my guidance there, is that, I think the drive-by kind of approach just doesn't work.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we heard earlier today from Charlene and Michelle and their proteges, their progenies, if you will. And we just heard in Nalanjana's presentation about senior leadership having a little bit of a disconnect sometimes between what they think is going well, right? In their organizations, we're doing great DEI, we partnered with this program, and we're doing this. And then the actual feedback that's coming from the rest of the workforce. So could you talk about some ways that you've seen, that you've done, or that work for senior leaders and emerging leaders to partner to move forward faster?
All right, I'll start first this time. There's a word that I heard yesterday. We had conducted a health equity summit for our clients to learn a little bit more there. And somebody, Dr. Hannah Song, Bill will know Hannah, talked about this notion of cultural humility. And I thought it was brilliant. And I think that kind of cultural humility is important in all regards, as well as the different levels within our organizations. Often, I know I do, as I look at this rising generation, I look to you and I think, save us, save us from ourselves, because you, at least through the research, it shows that you care about things that are deeply important to us in terms of our climate, in terms of the diversity, equity, inclusion within our organizations. But I also have to remember, and those of this kind of upcoming generation have to remember, that in addition to it being the most diverse generation yet, it's still the most segregated in terms of schools since pre-busing. And there's a poster that I remember seeing at one of the anti-Asian hate marches, and it said, "Love our people like you love our food." And I thought that was honestly so brilliant, because I think we are prone to collecting versus connecting. We are more prone to curation than being part of a community. And so that would be my guidance for anybody, but beyond the levels within our organization, if you are a senior leader today versus an emerging leader, but also within our different communities. I think it's so important that we are expressing some cultural humility to connect across difference.
Yeah, that's powerful. Sonia?
I think that was perfect in terms of the organizational, but I think a lot of times also we don't take like a 360 approach at solving the problem. And so like for HPRA, we're really focused on building the talent pipeline. And because again, we're a nonprofit and we're a volunteer board, so we're like, okay, what can we be good at? And for us, it's become incredibly important to prepare the talent, not only like make communications a choice career, because I just think, especially if you come from an immigrant family, you're taught to be a lawyer, to be a doctor, to be an accountant. So, our chapters, we actually ask our students to go outside of the mass comm school and go find Hispanic students at the business school, at the modern languages school, and bring them in and let them know that this is a choice. And so part of that development is also teaching them to ask the right questions, like that when you're getting interviewed, you're also interviewing them, like understanding what sorts of things to look for. And I think the more that employers start hearing these questions from candidates and then start seeing themselves not being able to retain talent because these questions are coming up, then it might be, maybe it becomes a little bit more obvious that they need to make some changes. So I guess what I'm saying is that we also have a responsibility. We can't just be like, leaders need to do this, leaders need to do that. Like, how do we, as employees and whatever our role is, how do we make sure that we're affecting change from other ways and we're creating pressure, I guess I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I think connection is, or connecting is one of those bigger things. Like Charlene and Michelle had the opportunity to do that right at home. But what if we do that at work, right? What if executive leaders are not just mentoring, but reverse mentorship, right? There's a lot to learn from and be inspired by the incoming workforce and those who are just at the beginning of their career. So I think we have time for some questions. We ran through this a little bit quicker than we expected to. Is there anyone in the audience who has questions for our experts, our executives here?
I'll be really sad if we don't have at least one question.
We have some questions over here on the left.
Hi, my name's Alexandra, and I'm at APCO Worldwide. So I know you mentioned Spelman. That's where I did my undergrad. Love Spelman. But something that was a barrier when I was there is that we do not have a PR major. I majored in sociology and anthropology and then went to grad school for integrated marketing communication. So that's how I did PR. So my question for you is, schools like Spelman, where there's a ton of talent, but not necessarily a PR or comms program, what programs are you going to? Are you going to the English program? Are you just doing abroad? If you're interested in PR, come to this meeting. Like, what targeted outreach are you doing?
I'm just going to repeat the question, sorry, for those who might be listening virtually and maybe some of those who over there who may not have heard. She's asking for schools or institutions that don't have PR or communications programs. So she went to Spelman, which is in HBCU. She's asking for those schools where there is no formal PR and communications program. What program are they looking for students to participate in their organizations? Are they going to the English school? She's just looking for how are we diversifying, how we pull our students out of schools if there's no PR and communications program.
So I didn't know that was an issue, so thank you for bringing it up. That's very important to know. I'll be honest with you, our student program kind of grew organically a lot through the mentorship and the leadership of Mr. Patrick Ford, who's here today, and I know that, I know he's everybody's mentor, but he was mine first. But it all started actually because he's a professor in residence at UF now, and he encouraged the kids to be part of HPRSA. So they became our first chapter like 3 years ago. Last year this year actually we added 2 more, University of Oregon and Hofstra. Actually, Dr. Molledo is their sponsor, and we had our first national scholarship winner, and she was from the University of Oregon. And then when we took our Bravo Awards program for the best multicultural programs in the industry, we took it to Austin. We engaged the UT students and the Texas State students there to come and volunteer, and now it's only been 6 weeks, and now UT is going to have a student chapter. So it's just been very organic. These kids are so, and I hate to call you kids, right, because you're not children, but these students, are so excited, and they have so much drive, and they're so motivated, and, you can see it when they're just exposed to things like this, or just the students that went to the Bravo program. They want to take leadership. They want to take the helm. So I will consider that moving forward, because I didn't know that that was an issue. But we also asked the students to go outside of the mass comm school, because we know that not enough Latino students are being exposed to this as a career choice. And to your point, and I say this all the time, PR is very cool, because it's like one of the few things that you can do and apply it to anything that you love. So if you love fashion, you can have a job in communications and fashion, or sports, or policy, or finance. Whatever you love, you can apply that to communications and like literally wake up every day and do a job that you love, because you're doing it for something that you care about. And so we go outside of the mass comm school and find kids to just at least expose them, you know what I'm saying? So, but thank you for bringing that up, and thank you for choosing PR and doing that on your own.
I'll just add, I'm not a public relations or a journalism major. I'm not an English major. I was a political science major at a liberal arts school, and I believe that my coursework and the critical thinking skills that I learned along the way were very, very advantageous for the work that I do. I think one way to also break into our field is through internships. So that's how, but that is what got me my foot in the door. I will also say that the PR Council has the Agency Ready program, so that's another way to gain experience. So there are a few different ways, but I'd be happy to connect with you afterwards. Mm-hmm.
I'll also say that Korn Ferry recently came out with a report or a study that they published about reimagining what the PR and comms industry, where we're getting our talent, right? Not necessarily just, someone did great in this healthcare practice. Pat Ford talks about this a lot. They did great at the Edelman healthcare practice, so us over here at BCW, we're going to take them. That's just hypothetical, right? But agencies often just take those who are doing something similar, and just reimagining who we're bringing into the industry can help to diversify it. And I'll say too, I also was not in communications. I had a chemical engineering degree, but communications is something that's critical no matter what role you're doing. As a good leader, you must be a good communicator. You must be able to have the masses follow you as a leader, and you can't do that if you can't communicate your vision, right? So you really don't have to come out of a PR, comms, or journalism school, although that's where we tend to siphon our talent from. There are talents and skills that you can't teach in PR and journalism school, that people just happen to be really good people, right? Or they happen to be really good number crunchers in a time where analytics is important to our field. So I would agree with that.
Thank you for sharing that.
I didn't get my degree in PR either. I was going to be a Spanish teacher.
George or Bill?
My name is George. I want to enter another element in the conversation. One is, for the record, that I do love Asian food.
Me too.
So the conversation that Asian American have to deal with is beyond just diversity, right? We have to deal with whether we even belong in this country. So these people don't think that you don't belong in the country. There's no way they're going to put you in charge of things. And I just want to, I know Sumi will understand what I'm trying to say, but in terms of the Latino community, do you have to deal with that also? I kind of know the answer, but I don't know. I want to kind of get your feel for it.
So I'm sorry, Sonia, I'm just going to repeat George's question. So for those who are listening virtually, George's question was, he as an Asian feels that sometimes folks don't Asian American, thank you for correcting me, feels that people don't think they even belong in this country, and so they're hesitant to put them in leadership positions. And his question to Sonia was, does she feel that same reticence to put you in leadership positions because they feel you don't even belong in this country as a Latina American?
So yes, I have the privilege that I work with the Latino Media Network, which was the 18 radio stations that were just bought from Univision. I work for the two Latinas that raised $80 million to buy those Spanish language stations. One of them, her family has been here in the United States for like 15 generations or something. They're from New Mexico. And she made this incredible speech at a radio conference, and this will never leave me, because she said, it feels like Whether you've been here 15 generations or you just got here yesterday, you always feel like you're a guest in somebody else's house. Like the narrative, and it kind of chokes me up because it shouldn't be that way. But remember earlier I was talking about like how do we as people like make companies change, like where do we apply pressure? And so I tend to do that a lot, like, you know, look internally, and I'm gonna say this, and I don't think that I really get like, you know, slack for saying it, but I think people get surprised, and I had this conversation outside earlier. Latinos are Latinos' biggest problem. We cannot unite ourselves. We have all the biggest ists and the obias, and we try to pretend like that doesn't, like those words or those things that are being said don't apply to us. And I really feel like, yes, you know, a lot of things have to change, but I really feel that until the Latino community, there was one glimpse where I saw the Latino community unite around behind Mexicans when the comments were made at that press conference about, you know, they're sending us their worst, and you really like, I saw all Latinos go, you can't talk about Mexicans like that. That's probably the only time that I've seen our community like really unite, and it gave me this glimmer of hope, but we have to look, the Latino community has to look internally and kind of like address some of those own issues, because we don't have the power that we should have considering the spending power that we have and how we are in numbers, because we are very divisive within ourselves. And so I often try to look at things like, how can we do better versus like putting it on somebody else, like, what can you do better? And so I feel like, yes, we do feel that way, but I feel that we have a lot of responsibility in that.
Got it. Any other questions? We have one right here.
Oh, I saw over there too. Oh, I thought I saw a hand up over there as well.
Hi.
Oh.
Hello, my name is Dr. Miles from Marquette University. We have some students here, and we're learning a lot. I wanted to ask you all, based off of what's working in organizations, what should our students be thinking about or seeing when they enter these organizations? What's some signs that diversity, equity, and inclusion are important aspects of that culture?
Did everybody hear that questions? Okay.
I think there's a few things that I would say are really, really important. Like, how does the culture feel, right? We talk a lot about numbers. Numbers are fine and good, and I think they're an interesting indicator. So I would ask a lot of really good questions. I think the power of questions are really, really important. But I think you're going to know just on our feel, the look and feel, I would say, are really, really important. I think there are a lot of just kind of intangibles that you just experience in the way of just feeling seen. I was talking to somebody very senior just the other day, and who just talked about just the importance of feeling seen, and that just shows like how much of our life we go through without feeling seen. I know that feels kind of light, but I think you know in your gut when you feel like you are welcome, you have a sense of belonging, that somebody talked about feeling that you matter. I know that not every organization is where it wants to be fully with its representation, but I think in some cases we have to be pioneers. Some organizations are not going to be exactly where we want it to be, where we would prefer to be. But I think if there is a cultural humility to let's do this together, let's co-create together, I think there are times like that where we have to give folks some chances and help build along the way. So those are a few things that I might point to.
One of my favorite questions to ask is, what is the number of average years of your employees here? Because I think turnover is a great indicator of where your company culture is at. Like, I don't remember your name, I'm sorry. Grant. But Do you know how rare it is to hear somebody say that they've been at an agency for 25 years? I was like, what? But that speaks to their culture. That speaks to the work that they're doing. That speaks to, like, you know, in a time where, you know, we have a shortage and you could probably go anywhere that you want, especially with that kind of experience, he's there. So I feel that that is always a really good indicator of how things are going, especially junior talent. If junior talent is bouncing after 3 years, that, you know.
3 years is forever in our agency world.
I was in my last agency for 10 years. So
They roll differently.
yeah, but yeah, that would be my question.
All right, I know we had a couple over here as well, and one here.
My name is Kayla Stein. I'm from West Virginia University, and I'm here with Dr. Martinelli. And you talked a little bit about soft skills, and as someone entering like the workforce, I really wanted to know how I'm supposed to assert those skills. It's something that I'd really like my employers to know about me, something that I'd like them to value about me. So I was just wondering, because it feels kind of weird to be like writing empathy on my resume, but I'd like them to know that about me. So like, how would you recommend me like asserting those skills and telling them about myself in that way?
Oh, gosh. Okay, I'll just have to be a truth teller here. Here's what I think we have to recognize about our industry. You all tell me if I'm lying. This is an industry that really values extroversion. This is an industry that really values, I will say, initiative. This is an industry that values almost, I mean, I hate to think before you speak, but sometimes yes. And I will say also as an Asian American woman, some of those things go contrary to my values. Like I was taught, think before you speak. Usually in a conversation, and that's why I looked at Sonia first, like I have been taught to like, hey, make sure that there's equity in like just people's voices in the room and things like that. And so somebody mentioned imposter syndrome earlier. I was like, gosh, I don't know if I really believe in imposter syndrome. I believe in imposer syndrome. I think that we are an industry that imposes certain expectations on folks, and I think as much as anything, we have to really think about things differently and value different skills so that we really see people in the fullness of who they are and the different things that we bring to the table. That said, you know, right? Now you know what the industry values, so how do you then adapt to that, right? And how do you find ways to make sure that you do shine in an industry that, again, values shiny objects and, talkativeness? Did I lie?
I think it speaks, though, to the importance of communicators in shaping culture. So since the pandemic and since post-George Floyd's murder, communicators have been really leaned on to shape the culture of their organizations more than ever. And that is from the Bellwether report that recently came out, that 80% of communicators feel like they're in charge of shaping culture. And if it's a culture that you want to stay in and you want to be in, you should find your voice to shape that culture. And not only are we doing it within our organizations, but if we think about those who we're providing counsel to, like our executives, right? I keep going back to total world transformation because that's truly what communicators are in a special position to do. If we think about for example, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, there's a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion peppered through there. They don't say the words diversity, equity, and inclusion actually anywhere in those goals, but we are shaping that. You know, we're more involved in the environmental, social, and governance process than we've ever been. And it's not just publicly traded companies who are doing those. So we're shifting from corporate social responsibility into communicators really shaping not just their organizational culture, but the world. So I think total world transformation, I think that should be the new DE&I. I think that's where we should focus.
TWT!
Sonia, any thoughts on not putting empathy on your resume?
I would like it, by the way, if I saw it.
I would agree that I would agree with everything she said, that we value certain things, but I always find that the best communicators are actually the type B people in the room, especially. I'd rather have a type B person in a crisis, to be honest with you, because they're thoughtful, they're analytical, they're taking in everything that's going on, and they are making decisions based on that. If I see a crisis person reacting to the client's energy, I'm out. because it's your job to kind of like bring down the temperature and be the adult in the room. And, you know, so there are definitely places in our business where being type B or having, you know, just, or introverted
Or type excellent.
or type excellent. You've got all the words.
I mean, I'm not taking the B.
I'm not taking a B. They're very useful. And I also think that another way to communicate it is like, you know, how do I, you know, think of a, you know, have a narrative, think of a story that, you know, kind of like shows you exerting that, that characteristic of yourself, you know, tied to leadership or tied to a certain situation. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like on paper, but you can, you know, write down some examples of where that was beneficial to moving something forward or helping you get something accomplished, and share that, because a good leader will understand, you know, what you're trying to express.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more question.
So thinking about, obviously, all that we talked about, but really thinking about action towards those things as leaders, what are some actual actions that you have seen work when you think about inclusion and recruitment in businesses, in terms of just, you know, obviously it's not just we're hiring diverse people, like what are actions that you have seen that actually work in terms of inclusivity?
So the question was, what are, as from a leadership perspective, what are some actions that you've actually seen work in an organization outside of just hiring in diverse talent? What are some of the actual progressive and active and tangible things that you've seen work in an organization?
So I'll say for us, we work on all the things, of course, but there's 4 things in particular that we have particular emphasis in. So one is making sure that we are employing a very robust learning environment. And so, again, we're very intentional about our words. We rarely use training. We talk about it as a curriculum. We talk about it as a learning journey, because it doesn't stop. It's not a one and done. What we're doing more and more of, however, is, yes, people have ample opportunities to learn across levels, but we're trying to do more role and responsibility specific education as well. So that requires more in terms of specifically as it relates to our recruiters and our hiring, and making sure that we're thinking about that broadly with our techniques, the way where we're recruiting, all of the things, but also in the senior most roles too. So we'll be employing something that we call like a CX, a leadership academy, in the coming year. So we'll be very focused on folks, so that folks don't have to adapt themselves so much, versus we are in a place where we see people more clearly for who they are. So that's really critically important to us. The other things, and by the way, we call it upskilling. So as well. So again, language, we're trying to total world transformation. And then the other areas that we're really, really focused is in certainly recruiting and retention, but I will add to that, making sure that we have resources. So not just telling people like, hey, this is our goal, but like giving folks the tools to be successful in that endeavor. Advocacy and advancement is really important. Retention is really a part of that. And then also making sure that we are very connected to our client work, because diversity, equity, inclusion is in everything. It's not just in one thing, and it's not cute.
All right. I think we're out of time, but thank you so much for having us. This panel was very compelling. I'm sure you got a lot of nuggets from it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Nice job, you guys.